Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, June 12, 2023. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg pledges full support of the federal government to rebuild the section of Interstate 95 that collapsed over the weekend after a tanker truck filled with gasoline burst into flames. Mayor of Miami, Suarez, and the Miami Police Chief, Manny, say the city is ready for any protests or demonstration during Tuesday's arraignment in federal court of former President Donald Trump on federal charges related to his handling of classified documents. President Joe Biden undergoes a root canal after complaining of tooth pain over the weekend. The White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, says the procedure has been successfully completed. The president is doing just fine, and that he worked in the residence this afternoon. It did cause him to skip or postpone some public events. U.S. House back in session as Speaker Kevin McCarthy attempts to reconcile differences with a group of House Republicans upset at the way the debt ceiling and spending cut bill was negotiated a few weeks ago. And in protest, those Republicans have been blocking House floor debate and votes on other bills. And in the meantime, the House Rules Committee begins work on one of their demands, overturning an ATF regulation dealing with pistol braces. The Biden administration confirms that China has been using Cuba as a base for spying activities. We'll hear from the National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby. And another American detained in Russia on drug charges. The latest from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg talking about the collapse of a portion of Interstate 95 in Philadelphia Sunday morning after a tanker truck with gasoline, and the truck has a capacity of over 8,000 gallons, caught fire under an overpass. Secretary Buttigieg spoke at the American Council of Engineering Companies Legislative Conference in Washington.
I want to address what happened in Philadelphia, the news that I think we've all been following and that my team and I have been closely engaged on, where a section of I-95 has collapsed, causing what we know will be extensive disruption for the movement of people and goods through that region. I've been in touch with the mayor, whose emergency responders were leading the immediate response, and the governor, whose State Department of Transportation will be leading the work of recovery and restoring that roadway to normal. Our federal highway administrator is on the ground right now and have been in touch with the delegation and other leaders. And the people of Philadelphia, the Pennsylvania DOT, and the entire region affected by this will have the full support of the United States Department of Transportation for as long as it takes to get that restored to normal. And I appreciate in advance all of the hard work that's going to go into responding to the impacts of that.
Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg at the American Council of Engineering Companies Legislative Conference and Convention being held in Washington. He also called the collapse of that section of I-95 a cruel reminder of the importance of infrastructure. CBS News quoting the Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, with regards to the complete rebuild of I-95 roadway, we expect it to take some number of months. We expect it to take that time, and we will have that specific time set forth once the engineers and PennDOT have completed their review. Former President Donald Trump left his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club today, heading for Miami, planning to spend the night at Trump National Doral before his arraignment in federal court on Tuesday on 37 felony counts related to, according to those counts, willful retention of classified documents, concealing or withholding documents, and conspiracy to obstruct justice in the federal government's attempt to retrieve the documents. At least 4 of the charges carry a potential maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. The mayor of Miami, Suarez, a Republican, held a news conference today talking about security arrangements ahead of Tuesday's arraignment, with protesters expected.
Obviously, we're all here because tomorrow there's going to be an event in downtown Miami at the courthouse, and we wanted to assure the public that we've already begun preparations for the event tomorrow. We're joined here by the Chief of Police, Chief Morales, who has, and we'll talk about what our plan for security is for tomorrow, and to make sure that everyone has a right to peacefully express themselves and exercise their constitutional rights, and obviously do it in a peaceful manner. In our city, we obviously believe in the Constitution and believe that people should have the right to express themselves. But we also believe in law and order. And we know that, and we hope that tomorrow will be peaceful. We encourage people to be peaceful in them demonstrating how they feel. And we're going to have the adequate forces necessary to ensure that. There may be, depending on the crowd size, some road closures. So people who live in the downtown area should expect additional traffic and should prepare for that. It's not in our initial plan. Initially, we're going to sort of take it step by step, and I'll let the chief explain how he will make that determination as to what roads are closed, how they're closed, and when they're closed. But the commuters should expect the possibility of some disruption. We are prepared for a variety of different size crowds, and obviously crowd size is dependent on a variety of issues, including but not limited to the weather. And so we have the ability to increase our capacity if necessary. Our fire department, fire chief, I spoke to him right before this press conference, and he has assured me also that there will be an increased fire rescue level of preparedness, including EMS services and what he would consider a number of on-duty personnel that are both at the task and command level. We're happy to be joined by our partners from Miami-Dade County. Thank you so much for being here. Obviously, we have, at some level, overlapping jurisdiction, and we're working not just with them, but I think it's safe to say we're working with partners, our law enforcement partners at all levels, to make sure that we're communicating, to make sure that we're prepared, to make sure we're sharing information, and ultimately to ensure that tomorrow goes off without any hitch. And so we wanted to ensure the public that we are ready.
Miami Mayor Francis Suarez at a news conference today in Miami. Security at the Donald Trump arraignment on the federal charges on Tuesday in Miami will involve a lot of law enforcement agencies: the U.S. Marshals, U.S. Secret Service, Miami Police, Miami-Dade County Police, Florida Highway Patrol, and the Florida Department of Law Enforcement among them. As the mayor said, joining him today, the Miami Chief of Police, Manny Morales. Manny Morales did speak with reporters about the possibility of protests.
Sir, who is in charge of the security around the courthouse, the streets, the sidewalk? Who's in charge of that security?
As it is usual with with Miami-Dade County and the incredible partnership we have with all the law enforcement agencies, it's a multi-agency approach. So we're all responsible to keep Miami safe.
So it's you and the state and the county police that are in charge?
And the federal agency. The property itself is a federal property.
So will there be barriers, metal barriers?
We're not ready to discuss that at this time.
Okay, because, sir, before you go, because we're getting, I'm Shimon Popez from CNN, we've been hearing from people in the building around that area that they're concerned that there's no hardening around the area, the perimeter, and that people can just freely come and go. There's yellow tape right now that's been placed. Mm-hmm. Will that change? Because there is a lot of concern that people may try to storm the building or try to enter some of that area. I mean, are you going to harden that area?
Well, what I can tell you is reach back to the folks that have reached to you and tell them that there's no reason to fear, that we got things well ahead. Okay, it's fine.
How can you say there's nothing to fear?
Because we're ready for it. Guys, can we get one at a time? Can we get one at a time?
I understand, but how can you say there is nothing to fear?
Because we're preparing. We have experience in handling large demonstrations. This is the city of Miami.
Are you going to start closing the streets?
As traffic becomes backed up, or if we have an abundance of folks that necessitates them to occupy space on the streets, then we'll make those decisions as the PCC or the Police Command Center determines.
I'll get you.
No, we have we have not reached out to Florida National Guard.
Have there been any specific threats or posts or anything that you all are taking serious?
There has been a lot of posts, none that I'm aware that can cause any concern of any type of credibility.
Miami Chief of Police Manny Morales at a news conference today in Miami with the Mayor Francis Suarez, talking about security preparations for Tuesday's arraignment in federal court of Donald Trump on the charges related to his handling of classified documents. This indictment coming as Republicans are entering the race for president in 2024, challenging Donald Trump's frontrunner status, according to most polls. We spoke about how this indictment is affecting the election with Meg Kennard, Associated Press national politics reporter.
It's been interesting to watch Trump's fellow GOP rivals reacting to this indictment news, and even more interesting considering the fact that we kind of have a template for this, going back earlier this year to the New York State charges on which Trump was indicted and watching the GOP field react to those. From several candidates, including Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and also former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, we've heard verbiage around kind of a weaponization of the Department of Justice, fellow Republicans kind of questioning the Biden administration's take on not only a former president from the opposing party, but also potentially Biden's rival for the 2024 presidential race. So we're seeing that characterization from some in the field. We're also seeing some, like former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, calling on Trump to drop out of the race, saying that this isn't something that Republicans or the country in general need to be dealing with in terms of looking at toward an election year. But then there are some others, like biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy, who has not only joined others in kind of condemning this quote unquote weaponization of the federal judicial system and prosecutorial system, but also saying that he would pardon Trump if he were elected to the nation's highest office. So there's definitely a difference of opinion among the Republicans who are competing alongside Trump for the GOP nomination. But, again, when we kind of think back earlier this year to Alvin Bragg's case in Manhattan against Trump, this is similar to what we heard at that point, kind of a first wave of not only support for Trump in terms of, standing alongside him and saying that this case wasn't something that should have been brought, but also an overall questioning of the system under which it was being brought. So we'll continue to see how those statements evolve. It is interesting to point out that, we heard from a lot of candidates and fellow Republicans across the country as soon as the news of the indictment came out. But then once the details from the indictment were made public, there's kind of been a not as loud, perhaps, response in terms of, kind of ingesting those details and seeing exactly what it is that the Department of Justice is alleging. There's just a little bit of a difference in the reaction from that point.
And you also contributed to Associated Press coverage over the weekend as President Trump held events in Georgia and North Carolina, which were his first public events since this recent indictment was announced. What was your impression of how he kind of handled his campaign is handling these developments?
I think we heard from Donald Trump over the weekend pretty much what we would have expected. He'd been, not since announcing these charges himself on his social media platform, Truth Social, he has been very, very loud in his condemnation of them and strong in his defense of himself. But we heard his characterization of these charges as baseless and completely without merit. And then he took the opportunity not only to go after the Department of Justice for their case, but also the Biden administration writ large, and then positing, why weren't these kinds of charges brought against Hillary Clinton, for example, back in 2016 in the investigation into information that she had in her possession as well. So I think we're hearing from the former president what we would have expected in terms of his characterization of this case against him. And considering that we're going to be not seeing him directly since it'll be federal court, but he is going to be in federal court this week on these charges, I think we can expect that we'll continue to hear a lot of that same characterization from him. He'll be addressing supporters once he returns back to New Jersey after that court appearance down in Miami on Tuesday. And I would anticipate that we will hear a lot of the same sort of messaging.
Do we know yet if the indictment announcement has had any impact on fundraising for former President Trump?
I think we've yet to see officially exactly how much money, but I would be sure that once there is a figure, we will be hearing that from Trump and his campaign. Let's remember in the hours and days subsequent to the Manhattan indictment earlier this year, there was more than $10 million flagged by the Trump campaign and his associated committees in terms of what they had brought in. So this point of fundraising and purportedly a show of support among those who have backed the former president is something that I would certainly think they're going to be wanting to flag for the rest of us.
Meg Kennard, Associated Press national politics reporter on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. C-SPAN covered Donald Trump's campaign speech on Saturday in Columbus, Georgia. the day after that federal indictment in the classified documents case was unsealed.
The ridiculous and baseless indictment of me by the Biden administration's weaponized Department of Injustice will go down as among the most horrific abuses of power in the history of our country. Many people have said that. Democrats have even said it. This vicious persecution is a travesty of justice. You're watching Joe Biden. Joe, think of it. Biden is trying to jail his leading political opponent, an opponent that's beating him by a lot in the polls, just like they do in Stalinist Russia or Communist China. No different.
Former President Donald Trump, a Republican presidential candidate in Columbus, Georgia, on Saturday, a rally hosted by the Georgia Republican Party. Today, Donald Trump posted on his social media platform that if he is elected president again, I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the USA, Joe Biden, the entire Biden crime family, and all others involved with the destruction of our elections, borders, and country itself. Congressman Wiley Nickel, Democrat from North Carolina, spoke today on the House floor in Washington about the charges against Donald Trump.
Tomorrow, former President Donald Trump will be arraigned in federal court in Miami. He's been indicted on 37 different felony charges, including false statements and representations, scheme to conceal, concealing a document in a federal investigation, corruptly concealing a document or record, withholding a document or record, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and 31 counts of willful retention of national defense information. Mr. Speaker, I read the incredibly detailed and evidence-based indictment, and it's deeply troubling and disturbing, to say the least. These charges show a complete and total disregard for the national security of the United States. The former president's action compromised the lives and safety of U.S. military personnel around the world. No one is above the law, and anyone who undermines U.S. national security must be held to answer for their actions. Mr. Speaker, he had our nuclear secrets stashed away in boxes in his bathroom. Listen, I'm here on the floor today because pro-democracy Republicans in North Carolina's 13th district rejected extremism and sent me to Washington because I ran to protect our democracy and our rule of law. This is about our rule of law. Mr. Speaker, as the American people try to make sense of these indictments, I think we should listen to the comments from Republicans who served in the Trump administration and other leading Republicans. John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor in the Trump administration, said, quote, "The indictment is devastating. Those who defended Trump before the charges were made public, or those who have not yet spoken, should be very carefully weigh how history will consider their statements." Mick Mulroy, a senior Pentagon official in the Trump administration, said, quote, "The classified documents described in the indictment are some of the most secret information we possess. This type of information should never be removed from a security facility, and once discovered, should have been immediately returned." Bill Barr, who served as Attorney General in the Trump administration, said, quote, "If even half of it is true, then he's toast. It's a very detailed indictment, and it's very, very damning. This idea of presenting Trump as a victim here, the victim of a witch hunt, is ridiculous. He's not a victim here. He was totally wrong that he had the right to have those documents. Those documents are among the most sensitive secrets the country has."
Congressman Wiley Nickel, Democrat from North Carolina, a first-term member of Congress, speaking today on the House floor. Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, tweeting last week when the news of the federal indictment against Donald Trump broke, "Today is indeed a dark day for the United States of America. It is unconscionable for a president to indict the leading candidate opposing him. Joe Biden kept classified documents for decades. I and every American who believes in the rule of law stand with President Trump against this grave injustice. House Republicans will hold this brazen weaponization of power accountable." That was the tweet from Speaker Kevin McCarthy last week. Today, Speaker McCarthy spoke with reporters.
The idea of equal justice is not playing out here. And so that's a real concern to all Americans. So as a policymaker, elected officials, we want to make sure it's equal justice for all. We want to look at it as weaponization. Now, you're with CNN, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this even further, because when somebody weaponizes government and they actually get removed from government, let's take Andrew McCabe, okay, former deputy.
But this is a different
let me
case.
let me answer the question.
This is a different set of circumstances, right? I mean, the former president is accused of misleading law enforcement, of a conspiracy of obstructing justice. That's a different set of facts. Are you prepared to defend him as the former president, and what other actions will the House take in the House Judiciary Committee in terms of funding?
Are you prepared to defend your network, CNN, that I'm answering your question. You could ask me any question you want, but I'm entitled to answer the question, okay? You can't put words in my mouth. Even though your network can hire Andrew McCabe, who was fired from the FBI for leaking classified documents. Did you remove him from your network? No, you continue to put him on to give judgment against President Trump.
Speaker.
You also hire Clapper. Clapper has come out publicly.
Mr. Speaker,
and
what steps is the House going to take in terms of, is there any effort to defund the FBI, any effort to defund the Department of Justice after what you've seen over the last several days?
So your network hires Clapper, who literally lied to the American public, one of 51 other individuals that had briefings and used it politically to tell the American public that a laptop was Russia collusion, even though it had all this information about the Biden administration. Are you prepared to get rid of those people from your network? Because my concern as a policymaker is that when you weaponize government and now you're weaponizing networks, that is wrong. So we will take all of our power to make sure that the legal system in America gets the blinders back on and people are treated fairly. I have a real problem that your network actually pays people who did classified information and then lied to the American public to try to influence a presidential election, and then you put them on your network to give an opinion about a president, and I'm answering your
But you're not answering
very clearly, because what your network has done has weaponized at the same time. I think equal justice is important for all.
House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican, with reporters in the U.S. Capitol building, that one-on-one with that reporter, but a lot of other reporters standing around asking questions. Donald Trump says that he will be giving a speech after his Tuesday arraignment in Miami on the federal charges when he returns to New Jersey, scheduled for 8:15 p.m. Eastern Tuesday. It'll be live on C-SPAN Radio and C-SPAN Television. President Joe Biden's physician, Kevin O'Connor, said in a letter today the president had a root canal after complaining of tooth pain on Sunday and getting his teeth x-rayed. The procedure led the president to miss a couple of scheduled public events, including College Athlete Day at the White House, celebrating numerous collegiate champions, and a one-on-one meeting in the Oval Office with the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. More on the president's root canal with the White House Press Secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre.
Has the root canal procedure been completed by this point? Can you confirm that? The doctor's note said it would be underway.
Yep, so I can confirm that the procedure has been successfully completed. The president is doing just fine, and he'll be certainly working in the residence this afternoon.
Were there any complications?
It's as you all know, for some of you may have had this procedure, it's a general routine dental procedure.
And can you talk about why the White House didn't disclose it yesterday when he got his first root canal and only disclosed it today after he would miss a public event?
So look, the initial procedure, as you just stated, Sungmin, was last night, and as you also just stated, we released the memo that was written to me from the doctor this morning or earlier today from his physician. And along with the plan for his root canal procedure today, we also included that as well. Look, I'm not aware of any other administration that has put forward or has talked about related dental procedure. So again, this is a routine dental procedure. As we've stated, you all have read the president's physician's memo, and There is nothing unusual about this. Millions of Americans go through this process, and so as soon as we were able to hear from the physician about where the president's status was today, we certainly shared that with all of you.
And can you is there any more information you can give on why he needed the root canal? Like, is he not good at brushing his teeth, or does he need to floss better, or anything else?
Wow, are you talking to the millions of Americans across the country? You're gonna ask them that question too?
I did a little research this morning.
I mean, look, I am certainly not a dentist by any means, so I cannot speak to what leads to a root canal. I know that it is a regular dental procedure. It is not uncommon. What I can certainly tell all of you, and I think we've said this, you all know this already, we've shared this, he was not put under general anesthesia. The 25th Amendment certainly was not invoked, and he received local anesthesia for the procedure, so I can certainly share all of that. As far as the health of the president's teeth, I cannot speak to that. Go ahead.
Thank you. So local anesthesia.
Oh my goodness, quick follow-up?
Tooth follow-up.
Oh, tooth follow-up. Cute.
So the local anesthesia.
Everybody's a little giddy today.
I know.
What is happening?
It's like Friday vibes.
I know, not Monday afternoon vibes.
But on the tooth, can you describe sort of the local anesthesia? What exactly does that mean? What was the president's demeanor, his ability to govern as he was getting this root canal that made you decide not to invoke the 25th Amendment?
So, gosh, I hope you guys, I should never get a root canal here, because then I could see the judgment that coming my way. Look, all I can say. Thank you, Mr. Tewitt. So it's a routine dentistry. There's nothing unusual about this. We wanted to share as much as we can. So clearly he wasn't under general anesthesia. He was under local anesthesia. And so, as you know, it's a numbing medicine for the local area, which does not have any broader effects. And so, just to give you and everyone else who's listening in or watching a little bit of that detail. And the president he went through the procedure. It started clearly last night. He went through the procedure today. It's successfully completed. He'll be in the residence working this afternoon, and that's the best that I can say. I have never gone through a root canal, so I'm sure others who have gone through that process can actually share more of what that's like. But again, this is something that Americans just across the country, go through. Many of them do, and it's routine, and he is fine, and it was complete.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters in the White House briefing room. On Wall Street today, the Dow up 189, NASDAQ up 202, S&P up 40. Washington today continues in a moment.
Live Tuesday on C-SPAN Radio. At 10 a.m. Eastern, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen testifies before the House Financial Services Committee on the state of the international financial system. Then, at 8:15 p.m. Eastern Time, former President Donald Trump speaks from his golf club in New Jersey, following his arraignment in federal court in Miami on charges related to his alleged mishandling of classified documents. Listen on the C-SPAN Now mobile app or ask your smart speaker to play C-SPAN Radio.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Story from the Washington Examiner. As House leadership wants a vote to reconsider the failed rule from last week, Speaker Kevin McCarthy has yet to win over the holdouts blocking legislation on the floor. The 12 members who voted down the rule on the bill to block the bill on gas stoves did so out of frustration surrounding the debt ceiling bill, government spending, and Congressman Andrew Clyde's being threatened by House Majority Leader Steve Scalise that if he voted against the rule on the debt ceiling bill, then it would be harder to get his pistol brace bill to the floor. More from the Washington Examiner article. While what the holdouts want in order to get a yes on rules is wide-ranging and hard to nail down, most of the members want to return to 2022 spending levels when it comes to writing appropriations bills. They want Congressman Clyde's bill to come up to the floor, and some want to cut spending for federal programs that have not been authorized in a number of years. When asked by reporters if he has the votes to pass the motion to reconsider the rule Monday morning, Speaker McCarthy said, "We will eventually get there." That reporting from the Washington Examiner. Well, while that's happening, the House Rules Committee today met to consider Congressman Andrew Clyde's bill. He's a Republican from Georgia. The bill would reverse a ATF regulation on the regulation of pistol braces. Republican Tom Cole of Oklahoma chairs the Rules Committee.
Today's hearing covers a single item, a resolution arising under the Congressional Review Act to disapprove the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives rule that forces millions of law-abiding gun owners, many of them disabled veterans, to dispose of or register their firearms with stabilizing braces. Stabilizing pistol braces were designed to help disabled veterans shoot firearms that they would otherwise be unable to hold, stabilize, or aim. In 2012, the Obama-era ATF recognized that these devices serve a legitimate function and determined that they should therefore not be subject to onerous regulation. The Biden administration's reversed over a decade of precedent and usurped Congress's legislative power in subjecting stabilizing braces to regulation under the National Firearms Act. Owners, many of whom are disabled veterans, must destroy the braces or their weapons, hand them over to the ATF, or submit to a lengthy and expensive registration process with no certainty of success. It's clear from this latest action that the Biden administration is intent on eroding the Second Amendment and constitutionally protected rights of law-abiding Americans. I strongly believe the government should protect rather than restrict our rights under the Second Amendment. We should be supporting freedom and personal responsibility, and the House should ensure that our constitutional rights are protected, all of them. That's why I'm proud to have joined every member of the Oklahoma delegation in co-sponsoring H.J. Res. 44. Indeed, my constituents in southwest Oklahoma expect nothing less.
Republican Congressman Tom Cole chairs the Rules Committee at today's meeting to consider the rules for House floor debate on this bill. The ranking Democrat on the Rules Committee is James McGovern of Massachusetts. He not only talked about this bill, but what's been happening with bills in general being blocked from coming to the House floor.
The People's House is frozen in limbo until Republicans can decide where their loyalty lies. With the American people who sent us here, or with the far right that is holding them over a barrel and demanding, not asking, demanding that we do what they say. And let me be clear, I don't support the bills the Republican leadership is trying to bring to the floor, but this is a dangerous precedent, and it's an embarrassment to the House. My friends, this is not democracy. This is not how this country should work, and this is certainly no way to govern this country. Now on to today's business. We are meeting to advance a dangerous bill to make firearm stabilizing braces widely available. 9 people outside a bar in Dayton in 2019. 10 people, including a police officer, at a grocery store in Boulder in 2021. 5 people in an LGBTQ nightclub in Colorado Springs in 2022. 6 people, including children, at a school in Nashville just a few months ago, all killed by mass shooters with the help of stabilizing braces. And today, my Republican friends want to roll back regulations on stabilizing braces. They want to keep in place a loophole that makes it easier for people to make guns more dangerous. I'm disgusted.
Congressman James McGovern, Democrat from Massachusetts, ranking member on the Rules Committee at today's meeting. President Biden has issued a veto threat on this bill that would overturn the ATF's pistol brace regulation. The president writes, even though congressional Republicans should take additional action to keep these and other dangerous weapons off our streets, they are instead pushing a resolution to reverse this rule and the progress we have made to enforce existing statutory requirements on these dangerous weapons. Story from Reuters. China said on Monday that allegations that it was using Cuba as a spying base are false, and it denounced the U.S. government and media for releasing what it called inconsistent information. A Biden administration official said on Saturday China had been spying from Cuba for some time, and it had upgraded its intelligence collection facilities there in 2019. Last week, the Wall Street Journal reported that a new spying effort was underway on the island, citing U.S. officials. That reporting from Reuters. At the White House briefing today, joining the press secretary was John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator for the National Security Council. Reporters asking about this.
The administration now says that China already does have this intelligence facility in Cuba. What can you tell us broadly about the threat posed by this facility, and just bottom line, how concerned should Americans be that the Chinese are listening to us from this facility?
Yeah, so look, I think you can understand why we're not going to be able to get into too much detail about our own counterintelligence efforts. But as we communicated over the weekend, this is not a new development. That China's been trying to achieve some intelligence gathering capabilities in Cuba and frankly elsewhere in the hemisphere. And that from day one, when we came in, we took this issue seriously. We've taken some steps to try to mitigate the vulnerability of those activities, and we're going to keep doing that. And the last thing I'd say is we're confident that we can continue to protect our nation's secrets in this hemisphere and beyond, and that we can continue to defend the country appropriately.
And can you just explain why you didn't confirm all of this when it was first reported last week? You said it was inaccurate, but what was inaccurate seemed to basically be the tense that they, weren't going to establish but had already established this facility. Why wait till Saturday to put this out there?
I'm actually really glad you asked that question. I can tell you that we were as forthcoming as we should have been at the time the first stories appeared. There is the sensitive nature of this information is such that we just simply couldn't go into more detail even before the first story appeared to try to better inform that reporting. That's how sensitive this stuff is. We just couldn't be more detailed. And then after the first stories appeared, we worked very, very hard, as expeditiously as we could, with the intelligence community to try to get some context downgraded so that we could provide it over the weekend, and we did that. But we were as forthcoming as we should have been, given the nature of this information. Sadly, not everybody seems to take it as seriously as we do, because clearly there's a source or sources out there that think it's somehow beneficial to put this kind of information into the public stream, and it's absolutely not. And there's a limit even now to what we can say about our knowledge of these activities. And I can just tell you, as somebody who works with all of you on lots of different sensitive stories, I wasn't about, in any way, shape, or form, to violate operational security by talking in any more detail, either before the first story or after the first story.
John Kirby, spokesperson for the National Security Council, taking reporters' questions in the White House briefing room. He also reacted today to reports that Ukraine had begun its counteroffensive against Russian forces in the Donetsk and Zaporizhia regions in eastern Ukraine. Ukrainian military saying Ukraine has liberated 5 villages so far.
President Zelensky has now confirmed that a counteroffensive is underway in Ukraine. The Ukrainian military says that it took back 3 villages in eastern Ukraine, but they also appear to be taking heavy losses, including of U.S.-provided equipment. So I'm wondering what the U.S.'s assessment of this counteroffensive is thus far.
We're going to refrain from providing an armchair assessment of this offensive. I'm going to still stay true to that. Look, offensive operations combat is happening. There's no question about that. But it's up to President Zelensky to characterize it, not us. And it's certainly going to be up to the Ukrainian armed forces to speak to the give and take on any given day. It's war. And it has already proven violent. What we're going to stay focused on is making sure that Ukraine can succeed on the battlefield. You saw a package of assistance coming through the USAI program announced at the end of the week. I think very, very soon you're going to see some additional drawdown packages coming from the United States. It won't surprise you that the kinds of things you'll see us continue to give Ukraine are the kinds of things that we know they need in this particular fight.
Can you now tell us whether the Ukrainians provided you any notice that these operations were underway? Now that they've confirmed, I know you've been cagey about saying whether or not this is
not cagey, I'm careful. They had no obligations to give us any kind of heads up or inform us of their operations, nor have they ever in the last 15 months.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Coordinator with the White House National Security Council in the White House briefing room with reporters. Story from the Washington Post: an American expatriate living in Russia has been arrested there on drug charges, according to the U.S. State Department. Michael Travis Leak was arrested and is detained in Moscow, a State Department spokesperson said in an email, adding that embassy officials attended his arraignment on Saturday. Leak is accused of selling drugs and is set to remain in custody until August 6th, according to a Moscow court report on Telegram. The report identified him as a musician and a former paratrooper. That from the Washington Post. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, asked about the case today at a news conference at the State Department in Washington.
We saw another American arrested in Moscow over the weekend. Do you have any updates on that case that you can share? And more broadly, does this administration's willingness to engage in negotiations over detentions encourage these type of provocative arrests? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me start with the second question first. We've been seeking to learn more about the apparent detention of Travis Leak, and we are working to be not only in touch with him and to have consular access, but also with his family. My number one priority as Secretary of State is the safety and security of Americans abroad. And this is no exception. So we're working to gather information to understand exactly what happened, and of course we will be very focused on this. Look, generally speaking, there is always a balance to be found in working to secure the release of Americans who are being arbitrarily detained, which we've done very successfully over the last couple of years, bringing Americans home from many different places. With, of course, concerns about whether any actions we take might further incentivize countries to engage in this practice. But that's why, even as we've been doing this, we've been imposing penalties, imposing sanctions, including under the Robert Levinson Act, to disincentivize countries from engaging in this practice. At the same time, we're working more and more closely together with other countries that unfortunately are similarly situated to us and having been the victims of the arbitrary detention of their citizens. To make it clear to countries that do this that there will be a price to be paid. But it is a balance. I believe we can do both things at the same time. At the same time, the countries that engage in this practice ultimately are simply going to further isolate themselves, as people from around the world will have to really think twice, think three times about whether they want to travel to any of these countries when there's a risk that they will be arbitrarily detained and used as a pawn in some kind of political issue that country may have with us or with many other countries around the world. And that ultimately is going to be very self-defeating for countries that have an interest in maintaining contacts, maintaining relations, having economic connectivity with the world. They will be isolating themselves. But we work on this virtually every single day, and we work to make sure that we get the balance right.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken. The State Department has issued a Level 4 do not travel notice for Russia, citing the unpredictable consequences of the unprovoked full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russian military forces, the potential for harassment, and the singling out of U.S. citizens for detention by Russian government security officials. The U.S. House of Representatives today debating and passing resolutions urging the Russian government to set free two other Americans who have been detained and determined by the State Department to be wrongfully detained in Russia. Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former U.S. Marine Paul Whelan. Secretary Blinken spoke today at a joint news conference at the State Department in Washington with the visiting Italian foreign minister. A story from UPI, former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi, a once flamboyant billionaire and media mogul who became a maverick of conservative politics for 3 decades, died Monday after a long battle with leukemia and other health problems. He was 86. In 2006, he spoke to a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress.
I speak in representation in the name of a country that has a deep friendship with the United States and is bound to your country by ties which go back many centuries. Many American citizens have Italian roots. For them, The United States was for them a land of opportunity that welcomed them generously, and they contributed their intelligence and their labor to help make America great. And I am proud to see that so many Italian Americans are today members of the Congress of the greatest democracy in the world. For my generation of Italians, the United States is the beacon of liberty, a beacon of civil and economic progress. I will always be grateful to the United States for having saved my country from fascism and Nazism at the cost of so many young American lives.
Former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi in 2006, speaking to a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress. That from C-SPAN's video library. He was prime minister over 4 different governments over 3 blocks of time, 1994 through 2011. He has died at the age of 86. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about emailed to you every day. Subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.